Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is our 225 session, and the title of this session is AI Foundations, Mitigate Risks, and Boost SOC Efficiency. I want to encourage everyone to take a seat, as we're not allowed to have folks standing. And with that, I want to say welcome, and also let our speakers take it away. Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, well, thank you all for coming today, and we hope that you'll leave today with an interest and a better understanding of how to implement AI automation in your own SOCs. Here's a disclaimer, we're not responsible for anything y'all do. My name is Sally. I'm a threat researcher for LogRhythm. I've been in the security industry for longer than I want to admit to. I've done things from Linux support for Novell, if you all remember them, to being an analyst and a security consultant. Right now, I'm focused on threat hunting and reverse engineering.
Thanks, Sally. Hey, everyone. My name is Mickey Ann McIntosh. I'm a compliance research engineer also at LogRhythm. And pretty much I started out as an analyst as well. And as we were doing research for our presentation, I learned that there are a lot of parallels between what a typical SOC analyst or SOC team had to do versus what I had to do as a security analyst. But we're going to go into all of those details. But first, we're going to go over some agenda items.
So first, Mickey Ann is going to go over some of the, like a day in the life of an analyst and some of the problems that AI will help with in a SOC. She'll also go over some foundations of AI that you'll need for cybersecurity. Then I'll talk about some of the benefits, risks, and challenges, as well as going over a use case. And then I will finish up. We'll talk about implementing AI in your own SOC in a secure, planned way.
All right. All right, y'all. So, day in the life of a SOC analyst. So I mentioned that I pretty much started out in the field as a security analyst, and when you're just onboarding, fresh out of college, there's a lot of I don't know what I don't know. And at the previous company that I was working with, pretty much I was onboarded on a security team where we were just developing our security posture. So there was a lot of development opportunities and a lot of learning curves to uncover. So first off, I'm just going to briefly go over some of the core functionalities of what a SOC analyst is expected to do. Some things that I was expected to do as well. So first off, we all know, we're security professionals. There's monitoring and detection. So there's the expectation to continuously monitor for alerts and events, et cetera. And then we have our incident response and investigation. That's pretty much when you find the root cause for any true positives that's detected. And then lastly, there's the threat intelligence and analysis phase. That's pretty much when you're identifying any emerging threats, any emerging adversarial attacks, and of course doing internal and external cross collaborations per whatever adversaries are detected. And so, when I was starting out as a security analyst and I was working within my team, we had our compliance officers, our GRC folks, our vulnerability management folks, and there was a lot of development to take place. We were developing our CIS Top 18 security posture. So during the phase of doing a lot of development and learning, not only internally, but with other departments or software engineers, et cetera, we got hit with Log4j. And if you remember 2021, that was a pretty interesting experience. And luckily, we had some really cool software that helped us to track that and remediate the same. But it got me thinking, what would Log4j look like in 2024? There's a lot of talk about AI and AI implementation for security and how that would all look during the investigation phase, et cetera. However, with any new technologies, there's always going to be some things that are wonky, right? There's always going to be what exactly could be the prelude stage and how would that look like when using AI. So I'm going to go over some modern day SOC problems when using AI. All right, so just to reiterate, right, we know the 3 functions of what a SOC analyst is expected to do. And in the case of Log4j, right, there's a lot to uncover if you're going to use an AI during the investigation phase. So first off, in the case of monitoring and detection, there's a lack of visibility. So for large language models and just AI in general, it can be difficult for those systems to understand an organization's systems as a whole because of the lack of access to its data. And most of the time that's due to privacy restrictions and of course separate databases. So without seeing the whole picture, it could be very difficult for AI to grasp the context of the given situation. And then in the case of incident response, right, without that human interpretation of what's going on, it can be very risky. And yes, LLMs and just AI in general can, uncover different patterns, but without access to that same data, it can miss the deeper meaning of that whole data expose. And of course, when it comes to, understanding clues, those clues can be overlooked, right? It's important to understand an adversarial attacker's methods and their full-on motivations to why it is that they're attacking. And then lastly, for threat intelligence, in the case of LLMs and AI in general, they're most of the time trained on data that's in the past. And in the context of Log4j, if we're thinking about being attacked by Log4j in 2024, that's a new exploit. So there's really nothing for an LLM to quote unquote learn from. So it struggles to keep pace with any adversarial attack. So if you were to ask an LLM, what is Log4j if it was happening in live time, it would either give you some inaccurate information, or it would just plain out just lie to you, making up something just, to work what it can work with. But that's just one of the dangers of using an LLM when you're doing an investigation on a very sensitive case. All right, guys, so I know that y'all love demos. So what I'm going to do is show you the prelude of an investigation when using an LLM to provide some type of analysis as you're ongoing an investigation. And for the case of this investigation, I wanted to look through the lens of an analyst. So I wanted to keep the platforms relatively basic. So first off, we're going to look over some network logs that are pretty static. So they're from a threat intelligence repo. And then I'm going to present the same on a spreadsheet. And then what I want to do is I want to see if an LLM can give me some type of preliminary information about what these logs are telling us. All right. Oh. I guess it's not able to play. Oh, is it? Okay. Yes, it is. All right. So I know it's a little bit small, but basically, as you can see on this spreadsheet, I have 4 network logs right here. So what I want to do is I want to read from left to right to pretty much go over what looks kind of wonky. So in our heads, we can think hypothetically that we work for a pharmaceuticals company, and we have a website. So our website is MD Surgicals. As we're going through the log, we're going to see some things that look rather suspicious. And remember, we're a pharmaceuticals company. We don't specialize in security. So we're trying to understand, the given information, and then we can move forward from there with what LLM has to share with us. So let me go ahead, now that I give you guys some context. So we see that there were some access points into our systems at 3 a.m., and we see that, those are our workstations. It's being accessed through Firefox, and it looks like there was some access on, hold on, let me pause it. And again, some domains that are misspelled. So I know it's tiny, it's a little bit difficult to see, but this, without even being a security professional, you can already tell something looks wonky. We have access points being logged in at 3 a.m. We run between the hours of 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then the spelling of the domain is highly incorrect, right? If anyone can spell surgicals, we don't normally spell it with an ER and then ending in OLS. So that alone tells me something looks suspicious. So what I want to do is I want to look up, some of this information on both of our LLMs. And so before we even get started, right, we know that as security professionals, there's what's known as a Tor network list. And if you're not familiar with Tor, it's basically just a list of malicious IPs that are typically used for malicious purposes. But we don't know that. Again, we're a pharmaceuticals company. We don't know anything. So we're going to depend on ChatGPT and Google Gemini to tell us something. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all 4 of the IP addresses in just a second. And I'm pretty much going to ask ChatGPT, what can you tell me about these 4 IP addresses? I'm expecting, hold on 1 second. I'm expecting ChatGPT to tell me, these IP addresses are typically used for X, Y, and Z, right? Right? But instead, it's really just telling me, the technicalities of what an IP address is. It's just reading through it, typical jargon onto understanding how an IP address works, which is, I don't really need to know that. So I'm going to go ahead and type the same in Google Gemini to see if there's anything different. And Google Gemini tries to be fancy. It lays out all of this information in a chart, yada, yada, but it's not really giving me what I need from a security perspective. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to ask both of these LLMs, the full network logs, like what exactly is happening here. So I'm going to copy all 4 rows. And just ask it, what can you tell me about these 4 network logs? And my expectation is that it would tell me, it looks like there's been some access points at 3 a.m., and it looks like, MD Surgicals, the word surgicals is misspelled, and, just tell me something that if I were to hire a security professional, they would easily tell me this, right? But instead, it's just doing the same thing. It's really just listing out how an IP is to be read, and, it happened at this time at 3 a.m., and just blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to copy the same thing and paste it in Google Gemini and see if there's anything different. Took a long time to load this time. But again, Google Gemini's try to be, fancy, and it lists out all the things. Hold on, I went by kind of fast. Let me go back. And it lists out all of the protocols into like a chart again. It's, again, not really telling me anything security basis-wise. So I thought to myself, you know what, maybe I should give it some context. Like, hey, where a company, our domain name is spelled this way versus the other way, now what can you tell me about these network logs? So we're going to go back to ChatGPT, type the same, and again, it is pretty small, so I'm going to do my best to describe what's being seen here. And literally, it's just copy and pasting the exact same thing it told me above, with the difference of it saying, oh, by the way, there's a misspell between MD Surgicals versus the other spelling. That's not really giving me an analysis of what I need. So what I'm going to do here is, went back again. I'm going to type the same into Google Gemini with that additional context and see if it does anything different. Again, Google Gemini likes to be fancy, but it's not really giving me anything concrete, nothing substantial. All right, so we're going to copy our same prompt and go into Google Gemini and see if there's anything different. that's really disappointing. It doesn't tell me anything. Instead, what it does is it assumes I'm asking it for a code snippet of some sort, and that's really it. It doesn't give me its analysis on anything. It's not really telling me that something suspicious something suspicious is happening, but rather it's just giving me a code snippet. But here's another slide for you guys. I wanted to just demonstrate, some other inabilities that can occur when you're doing the pre-stages of an investigation, because I didn't think that it was fair to just do that one demo. However, I was disappointed again, right? So for ChatGPT, there are two versions that I'm currently aware of per the presentation that we have today. There's ChatGPT 3.5, which is the freemium version, and then there's ChatGPT 4, which you pay for, right? So I'm expecting a little bit more quality, right? So I didn't want to be too harsh on ChatGPT, so I said, okay, why don't you tell me some information about this specific CVE that we have here? And notice how this CVE is from 2023. I'm expecting ChatGPT to have some type of trained data from at least 2023. However, it says that actually, the last time I was trained on anything was from January 2022, so please don't ask me that. So it's telling me that, okay, this freemium version of anything that I ask it, whether it's a CVE or what happened yesterday with the weather, it wouldn't be able to tell me because it's trained on data that is so outdated. So I said, okay, let's fork out some money and see if ChatGPT 4 is worth it. So with ChatGPT, there's what's known as agents, which you can almost think of as like a plugin for specific searches like you're looking for. So if you're looking for a CVE, in the case that we are, you can use a CVE agent. And by the way, anybody can create an agent. So you can pretty much go onto GitHub and upload your own agent. So I would say if you wanted to do this on your own, do it with discretion. So I went ahead and typed in a CVE that ends with 412. It's a little bit tiny for my end as well, but it ends in 412. It's from 2024, right? So I asked this specific agent, what can you tell me about this CVE? However, instead, it tells me information about a CVE that ends in 312. I asked it for 412, and it gives me information about 312 that has no relevance to what I'm asking. So again, we have that inaccurate data going on. So I decided to use another agent, the Strobes Intel AI, and I asked it the same question, what can you tell me about this specific CVE that ends in 412? Thankfully, it gives me the information that I'm looking for. However, and this is where it's very important to take note of every specific detail that these LLMs are telling you, because here in the exploitability section, it tells me that this exploit is not being exploited at all, which is super inaccurate because this CVE was actively being exploited, hence why I was asking about it. So that's information where it can give you the definitions of something, but if you wanted to find out real time what's actively occurring, that's when it starts to lie to you, basically. So I said, okay, you're not so good with CVEs, ChatGPT. What can you tell me about an IOC? So I decided to use the IOC analyzer, and I typed in this domain so it can tell me about the IOCs. However, ChatGPT, again, kind of was just like, hey, I know some things about IOCs, but I don't have access to really anything, so there's that lack of visibility. I'm not able to really tell you. Okay, that's understandable. Next. All right, so we have Google Gemini. Well, I do like Google Gemini for the purposes of it being able to access the internet and tell me some information that's a lot more accurate in the case of it being able to grab information from the internet that's currently being swirled around. However, there's still the lack of visibility issue. So I went ahead and typed in the same domain to see if Gemini could tell me anything. But again, it has that lack of visibility. There could be a paywall issue, et cetera. So it really wasn't, again, able to tell me anything. So I said, all right. Actually, you know what? I've been typing a lot of stuff in Google Gemini today. I'm asking it all these questions about code snippets and IOCs. Is any of this being stored? So I asked Google Gemini, is any of the inputs that I'm inputting being stored in your backend? And Google Gemini tried to be a little bit, sneaky and said, I can't directly tell you, but what I can tell you is that all the information that you're inputting is helping me a lot. So in quotes, yes, it is storing every single thing that you're inputting, and I would strongly advise against putting anything that's like personal or any organizational proprietary information into Google Gemini because it's storing it. So if you were to have, a competitor or say an adversarial attacker to ask very specific questions, it quote unquote could retrieve it and give it to that adversary person, and they can have access to whatever you just inputted for it to digest. And then I started to be a little bit sneaky, and I said, okay, Google Gemini, you think you can be a little bit sneaky? So can I. Oops, sorry. In your opinion, what's the best, is patching the best, security protocol for this specific CVE? So for most AIs, they generally like to remain objective. But in this case, it said, in my opinion, and I was like, oh, I got you, bias information. You're not supposed to say, in your opinion. You're not a person. So that just goes to show that sometimes with any type of information, whether it's security related or whatnot, AI as a whole is actively developing. So sometimes information can be based on bias. All right, so that was a lot of judgments. I was judging LLMs pretty hard, but I think it's fair to say that it's important to understand what these technologies are before we start using them and before we start judging them so harshly. All right, so let's talk about AI from a technology point of view, right? There's simulated human intelligence. So basically, AI simulates human intelligence by, leveraging algorithms and also by showcasing like operations of technologies and using that information to mimic cognitive processes like learning, reasoning, and problem solving. And then our dear friend, large language models, that basically is trained on massive amounts of data, of text data specifically, and that's where the term large derives from. And basically, after it ingests this large amounts of data, it's able to learn complex patterns and relationships within language. So that's why, these LLMs sound so realistic. They're actively learning all of these patterns in language itself. And then there's machine learning. So we're all tech professionals. We know the difference between AI and machine learning, right? But a lot of the times, the average Joe can use the term machine learning and AI interchangeably. So it's good to understand that AI is like an umbrella term, and then machine learning is a subset of AI. It's like a type of AI application. And pretty much the way it works, it automatically learns insights and recognizes patterns, and then it uses that pattern to identify information that's used in data. And then per that identification of patterns and all of those insights, it then is able to make more complex decisions. And it can do this all without any programming, which is pretty cool. And then we have predictive analytics. So pretty much here, AI is analyzing historical data and also identifying patterns. And with the usage of identifying patterns, it's then able to make predictions on future outcomes. So a lot of stuff, right? A lot of information. Now, let's go ahead and talk about AI's utilization in cybersecurity. All right. So in the world of automation and threat detection, pretty much that involves leveraging AI to continuously monitor network traffic, system logs, and user behaviors to help indicate, any malicious or suspicious activities in real time. And then we have behavioral analysis. That's basically when using AI, it can establish the baseline of, quote unquote normal behavior for users, devices, and applications, thus enabling the detection of any, anomalies or deviations that may indicate malicious activities as well. And then when it comes to threat intelligence with AI specific or AI-powered threat intelligence systems, that's aggregating and analyzing vast amounts of data from various sources, right? So with all of that access to those data points and it's analyzing all of this information, it can then come out of it by showcasing emerging threats, vulnerabilities, attack patterns, and in the case of what's valuable, that's pretty valuable information. And that can help security teams to be a lot more proactive with their defense measures. And then lastly, we have security automation. So we like when our work is a little bit automated, right? Sometimes it could be a little bit boring or painful to go through certain tedious tasks. So in the name of AI, it can automate routine security tasks such as patch management and policy enforcement. And theoretically, that could allow organizations to be a lot more rapid with their responses when it comes to threats and mitigate risks a lot more effectively. So now Sally's going to go over some of the benefits and risks and challenges when it comes to AI automation.
Thanks, Mickey Ann. So right now, I'll talk quickly about the good, the bad, and the ugly of implementing AI in your own SOC. And I will also show a use case where it can actually be beneficial. So AI automation has the potential to transform SOCs by streamlining the way that threats are detected, analyzed, and mitigated. By automating repetitive tasks and streamlining workflows, this frees humans, or analysts, up to focus on more strategic initiatives. Here are some key areas, some key areas of automations in SOCs. Some of these I've done myself, like behavioral analysis for detection, generating playbooks and investigations. Like any type of automation, AI automation is there to provide relief from routine tasks. Where AI can really stand out, though, is one, it can help you write the automation, and two, it can deal with large amounts of data that us mere mortals can't think about handling, assuming that you know how to use the tools right. So the concept of garbage in, garbage out is particularly pertinent to AI. If the data that you feed it is biased, unrepresentative, or bad, you're going to get output that's likely untrustworthy or just incorrect. The implications of garbage in, garbage out are profound if you're starting to rely on it for things like threat detection and response or making decisions. And that's not even touching on data poisoning or malicious models that I'll talk about in just a second here. So integrating third-party AI solutions with your security products offers some benefits like compatibility and cost effectiveness, but it does come with some potential downsides, like being hard to integrate, introducing potentially some vulnerabilities into your systems. So what you'll want to do is you'll want to be aware of things like risk assessment, compatibility, and what kind of data you're putting in, as well as licensing requirements and who owns the data. So the main issue, or one of the main issues with AI, is the opacity and the complexity of algorithms. Most of them function as black boxes, meaning that we don't know what they're doing, and the output cannot be easily explained or understood by humans. So this is where people will struggle to trust implementation of AI operations, and frankly, they should struggle to trust them if they don't know how decisions are being made or why certain actions are being taken. I haven't seen it yet specifically in the security industry, but I have seen several lawsuits pop up around health insurance decisions that were made by AI. I mean, I would be incredibly angry if AI denied me insurance. So to anyone out there who's working on AI or models, prioritizing explainability so that we understand how those decisions were made will really be helpful to everyone. So now I'm going to talk about a case study, and I got this idea from a researcher called Bank Security, whose article I have put in the links. at the end of the presentation here. So among all of the many things that we're expected to do as SOC analysts, we get flooded with security articles and security feeds just to kind of keep up with what's going on. And that's an important part of what we do, but oftentimes it just gets pushed off until Friday afternoon or maybe never. So here, we're asking if AI can actually help us filter this flood of information. And the answer can actually be yes. Looking at large amounts of data is a place where AI can actually really shine, especially if all the data is in one repository. So before I jump into the demo, I just want to show the flow of data here. So all of the data is what I'm choosing, and that comes from news and threat feeds that I like, as well as a couple of Telegram channels that I follow. Those are then aggregated by a newsfeed service called InnoReader, and then sent to Google Drive, where they can be accessed by really whatever you want. But I'm using Google Gemini, I think it used to be called Google Bard, and Google Colab. And then once that data is analyzed, you can use it for things like threat hunts, playbooks, or just summarizing what's going on this week. So I have never had a video work out well in Microsoft PowerPoint, so I'm just doing screen caps here. So here are just a sampling of some of my feeds in InnoReader here. And as you can see, there's quite a lot. I don't remember if the 967 number was like from a week or from a weekend, but either way, that's a lot of things that I don't have time to read. And honestly, a lot of them are not even pertinent to the work that I'm doing. So you do have to have a paid account of InnoReader to send your information to Google Drive like I'm showing here, but it's pretty cheap, and you can also do a lot of advanced filtering operations on your threat feeds. So here I'm popping over to Gemini, and this is where you give it access to your Google Docs. Once you've done that, you can start querying the data with Gemini. So a tip here is to always put at Google Drive or wherever you want to query from, because we want just the documents that we put in there. We don't want it to query from God only knows where it's pulling data from. And here it can actually be pretty successful. So I think this was from a couple of months ago when Volt Typhoon first came out. Another place that you can pull this is Google Colab. If you don't know what Google Colab is, it's a hosted Jupyter Notebooks environment. We really like Jupyter Notebooks on our team. We use them a lot for automating threat hunts and playbooks because API integration with security products is pretty easy with Jupyter Notebooks. The issue here that I had is integration with Google Drive. Honestly, sometimes it was just not working for me, but potentially that issue will be solved as most AI products are taking updates at a fast and furious rate right now. So using Jupyter Notebooks for threat hunts and playbooks, it's just easier to just put the data here. You can skip a step. It is beyond the scope of this talk and a lot more technical, but if you're a logarithm user or you're interested in Python and Jupyter Notebooks, you can just Google one of the several presentations that myself or my colleagues have done on the topic. So now I'm going to talk about how to implement AI automation in your SOC. So in my opinion, a lot of AI implementations, this is my own personal opinion, they're not quite ready for the big time yet, especially ones that are shoehorned into security products and sold with the promise of like solving all of your security problems and running the product for you. AI automation for the SOC right now just relies heavily on chatbot type features, and those are often in third-party products. But all that being said, you can implement AI automation in a helpful way if it's done thoughtfully. So before you even want to start doing this, you'll want AI-specific security policies in your organization, which our expert Mickey Ann will talk about next. Then you'll want to have documented SOC processes. And because picking a good use case is really going to depend on having known and documented processes, so you can go through a good evaluation for what will work. Some things that you might want to think about are accuracy needed, what type of data is being used, where is that data being analyzed and where is it held, as well as compatibility and scalability issues. Once you've sussed that out, and if you don't have a good use case, don't force it. AI is still really in its infancy for use in the SOC. Once you do that, you can start a small-scale pilot implementation in the SOC to see if it's actually effective and to identify any challenges or areas for improvement. While you're doing that, you'll want to document any models used. So document your algorithms, document the underlying principles like machine learning or specific models like neural networks or decision trees, as well as documenting the data going in and the expected outcome. You can use metrics that you should be using anyway in the SOC to evaluate your success. Things like mean time to detect, mean time to respond, maybe an increase in accuracy of threat detection or a general decrease in response time. I am a big fan of using playbooks for things like threat hunts, investigations, things like that, because they make it really easy to track those metrics and then make your management happy. Over to you.
All right, so how much time do we have? Like 10 minutes or so? Okay.
Yep.
All right, so that was really helpful, Sally. Thanks for providing that. But before we implement any type of new technologies, come on, we work in security. We have to do a classic risk assessment, right? Our favorite thing to do. And pretty much, from a high level perspective, you're basically itemizing all of the things that can be impacted when implementing this technology, right? You're thinking about how does it affect our data protection? How does this look from a compliance perspective, governance, et cetera? And then once you finalize that itemization, you then want to say, okay, is this a risk that we can accept, right? Is AI worth it? If you say yes, then of course you have to think about governance. How are we going to govern over this technology? Whether our staff is directly using it or indirectly, we have to think about policies, right? So during policy development, you're thinking about all of the same elements that you just uncovered in your risk assessment, the data protection, compliance, et cetera. And then you want to ensure that there's a formal way for everyone to attest to those policies, right? So whether they're in-staff employees or contractors, third parties, or whatnot, we all know that they all have to attest to our policies, even if they're indirectly or directly using the technology. And then, of course, there's training and awareness, right? Everyone knows that every organization needs to have a security awareness program. And even if you don't plan to use AI in your organization at all, you want to stay away from it, I still recommend that we use AI in our security training because it's in our face. Folks are using ChatGPT and Google Gemini, although I don't recommend using it when you're in an investigation per se, but folks are using it for the purposes of marketing, for the purposes of anything. So we want to ensure that we, teach our staff how exactly this technology is evolving and how to properly use it. Don't input any proprietary information. Don't put any personal information. Please don't put your social security number in there. So we want to ensure that they have the best practices and guidelines when they're using this technology. All right, so with governance comes compliance. And I have here just a list of frameworks to consider, but of course there's a whirlwind of other frameworks to consider. But in retrospect to data protection and privacy, GDPR, hands down, it's strict. It's gonna make sure that you're remaining compliant to data privacy. But of course, there's also CCPA and HIPAA, right? According to what type of organization that you are. So with those strict guidelines, you're showing and promoting to your customers that, hey, AI is a pretty big thing, and we're using it, but we're making sure that we're protecting your data and appealing to your privacy. And then you want to always ensure CIA triad, right? So if you've ever been through an ISO 27001 audit, you know it is rigorous. You're going through very specific keynotes of your ISMS, right? So it's tailoring you to be not only secure, but to maintain your security as technology is evolving and as you're implementing these new technologies into your system. Likewise with NIST, NIST is just showcasing the standards and guidelines when using any type of technology. And then lastly, we have ethical AI principles and practices. With any evolution of technologies, there's always a thought of ethics, right? So nonprofit organizations, tech companies like Microsoft, Google, and so forth, I have here IEEE, which is just a group of nerds, a group of engineers. And they basically gather around to list out what are the ethics that we want to remain adherent to as we're using this technology to automate our systems and to provide convenience to our customers. Handing it off to you, Sally.
Thanks. So now I'll just go over a few risks and tips to leave you guys with. So as with any type of automation, there are risks, as you may remember here from this really old Simpsons episode. So be careful, again, where you get your data from. I have worked a lot with anomaly detection, and I have never found a training data set that did not need to be trimmed going into that. Be careful with your ML models. Pretty recently, a security team found over 100 malicious ML models on the open source repository Hugging Face. And I believe that either most or all of them had backdoor functionality. And to make things worse, they got past Hugging Face's required malware scanning. So be careful with that. Also, too, if you're building ML models, be aware that model inversion exists as a form of reverse engineering, which may be fun for people like me, but it's not good because you can get the data out of it. So use best practices like data anonymization or zero-knowledge proofs if you're really savvy about that. So please, like Mickey Ann just spoke to, don't put sensitive information into anything. It's tempting sometimes just to get a quick answer. Recently, some people from a company put proprietary source code into ChatGPT, which essentially causes a leak. You'll want to remember that there are potential legal and compliance requirements, so know which laws and which compliance requirements are governing you. And the most important thing is always, always review your results very thoroughly. AI does make a lot of mistakes. I've had it do things like make up absolutely ridiculous Python functions. When it can't find one that matches, it may just put embarrassing errors in reports. So AI can improve analyst experience, but it still requires adult supervision. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please come up, or any fun AI automations you want to share. I'll also put our links up here, which I think you can just download the slides from the site, but here they are as well. Yeah. Any questions? Thank you. Thanks.